The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was a revolutionary game. Released over 6 years ago, it changed how we viewed Zelda, open worlds, and games as a whole. It opened up players to a degree of freedom sparsely seen before. It has sold about 30 million units by now, and was likely a major factor in the huge success that is the Nintendo Switch. But what if it was just better? So anyway, hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the sequel to Breath of the Wild, The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. I am going to try my best here, but also, this has taken so long to actually get going that it's been like two and a half months since I actually finished the game. So if you've seen the last episode, then you would know that Tears of the Kingdom was kind of the whole inciting incident of why I'm started doing these reviews in general, and also like just posting on this channel as a whole. But it's also been, a while, so some of the thoughts are kind of fading, and there's definitely going to be some stuff that I'm going to end up skipping over that I definitely would have wanted to mention, but hopefully this won't be super incoherent and rambly and repetitive. I have notes, I have bullet points, so hopefully it will make sense still, but I'm sure there will be points that I would have liked to mention that aren't going to be here. So yeah, let's just get right into that. So for context, real quick, I'm a big Zelda fan, big Zelda girl. I've 100%ed every Zelda game I've played, aside from Breath of the Wild. So that's including Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Minish Cap, Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes, Link's Awakening, and also Age of Calamity, if you count that or not, which, like, a lot of people don't, which, like, whatever, not the point. I played Breath of the Wild, I played a ton of that, I think it's, like, roughly 120 hours into that game. I did all of the story stuff, but not all of the shrines or the side quests, and definitely not the Koroks. I was very happy with my time with that. That was all fun and good. And then for some context of Tears of the Kingdom, just because it's such an open-ended game, I feel like it would be useful to give some context of what I actually, like, did, you know? So I did all of the story content, all of the side stories, but not all of the side quests. I did 76 shrines, 50 light roots, which will get into what that means if you don't know what that means, 54 Korok seeds, 25 hearts, and maxed out my stamina bar. And it ended up being like roughly 95-ish hours of gameplay, roughly. So yeah, that's all of the context stuff that I have to mention. So just real quick, to just set up the story. The game essentially takes place like 6 or 7 years after Breath of the Wild. We don't know exactly, but based on like kids' aging and new kids appearing. We could say that's like just about like 6-7 years since Breath of the Wild. And now, Zelda and Link, they're exploring under Hyrule Castle, and then they find the corpse of Ganondorf, and then the corpse of Ganondorf comes back to life and destroys the Master Sword, and Link gets Metroided and loses all his hearts and stamina. And then Ganondorf just shoots a big old gloom laser into the sky. Makes a bunch of sky islands appear, and a bunch of huge holes into the depths of Hyrule. And that's pretty much all the setup you need to know. So, yeah. As I mentioned in the first video, in the Backlog video, which you should watch-ish, but like, I don't know. At this point, right now I'm assuming you're here because you did watch that one already. But, as I mentioned there, Tears of the Kingdom was something I was very worried about pre-launch. It was something that just because it was the longest gap between Zelda games ever, but yet it was still reusing the same world map and reusing the same engine and the engines. And it was also something where, even though after the game has released, it very clearly isn't, it was rooted in something that was initially an idea for just like a DLC of Breath of the Wild. So all of that on top of it $70 price tag, it was something that worried me. But like, I'm very much into Zelda, so it was like, I was getting it anyway. But it did a lot to like assuage those fears. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Not important. It did a lot to make those worries not present by the time I was actually playing and finishing it. Just the depths. The depths was kind of huge, and it's kind of wild that they didn't mention it in the marketing at all. Like, I think in all of like the trailers and teasers and the commercials and shit, there was like 3 total seconds of gameplay from the depths, and they never talked about it. But for those of you who don't know, the depths is like an underground world, and I mean world because it literally is a 1-to-1 double of the overworld from Breath of the Wild. Like, it's the terrain and stuff is like inverted, so like where there's high points, it's low points in the depths, and vice versa. And where there's water, it's a wall. But aside from that, it's like directly parallel. So like it's literally doubling the amount of landmass there is to explore. And they just didn't feel like mentioning that ever. They really wanted to push the fucking Sky Islands, which were frankly kind of disappointing, but I'll get into that later. But yeah, so that was a big one, and the story's quite good, or at least a lot better. Like, I'd honestly say it's probably my second favorite Zelda story behind Skyward Sword, but I don't know. It's up there. It's pretty good for Zelda standards, and it's definitely better than Breath of the Wild. But again, we'll get into more specifics of that stuff later. I really liked how the regions were kind of like different, like built different, like the different regions on the map were like different. Like, it's a very little detail, but like, you know, like the Great Plateau isn't its own whole region because the Great Plateau isn't nearly as important in this game. It's just part of like, I think the Central Hyrule region and stuff. So like a lot of like the regions are changed, and all of the towers are moved to different places. And that's like something that, again, I will get into later, but how this game very much capitalizes on the idea that you've played Breath of the Wild before, which makes sense, because Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda game ever by, like, a huge margin. But that's, like, a whole thing. And then also just, like, the runes, the new runes that you have are way better. Way cooler. They have so much more interesting stuff happening with them. There's Fuse, which is really cool. It lets you just, like, glue any interactable object to your weapons or shields, or even arrows. And, like, a lot of them have, like, fun, like, unique attributes to them. But then there's also, like, weapons and shields that have specific pairings. So, like, there's Zonai swords that will get an additional, like, power up when you fuse it with Zonite item. That's very cool. I do wish there was kind of, like, more special stuff, especially for the arrows. The arrows, it's like, if it's not a bomb, glow seed, or, like, eye, then it's pretty much just which one does the most damage. But like, it's still a cool system, and it's cooler than anything that Breath of the Wild had, and it did a huge thing to make materials actually like valuable and like a good reward to get, which retroactively makes combat better, as I'm probably gonna be saying a lot in this video. We'll get back to that in a bit. But yeah, so Fuse, pretty cool. rewind is like kind of ridiculous that any interactable thing that is on the screen, you can just rewind the past 15 seconds of its movement and also like its rotation and stuff. That's like kind of nuts, especially how much like things are generally like there. That shit's crazy. That I do not know how they made that work on the Switch. And then the Master Hand, which lets you build like whatever you want, is like really cool. Like I like even like a few days after launch, I was literally seeing people make like Gundams and like death machines. So yeah, that's like super cool. And then there's Ascend, which is like fine. Like it's a useful thing, especially in the context of all of, like the caves and stuff. It definitely makes that much better. Like you can very much feel, because it was originally like a dev tool, and then they're like, this is actually really useful. What if we just let them actually have this? That one's like fine. Like it's not bad, but it's like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll use this when it wants me to. But that's the thing, is that in Tears of the Kingdom, that's the only one that's like that. Whereas the other three are very much, you can use it whenever the fuck you want to use it. And like, it's useful in like every situation, versus something in Breath of the Wild, like, I don't know, Cryonis. Who the fuck is using Cryonis? I hate Cryonis! Who wants to just make an ice cube? What? Anyway, and even like bombs and stuff, it's like, oh, okay, there's a little bomb wall here, let me blow that up. Or let me go mine for ores with these bombs. But yeah, so that stuff's all like really cool and did a lot to make me feel a lot better about Tears of the Kingdom. Speaking of comparisons between Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom is, between you and me, just better in every way. It just is. It's just better in every way. Like, again, as mentioned, the rune abilities are way better, way cooler, way more applicable in so many circumstances, and also, like, can be cohesive and, like, interact with each other. They open so many mechanical and gameplay options. It's wild. And as a part of that, it makes the shrines infinitely better. The shrines are so much better in this game. Even if a lot of them can be solved by just making a long bridge, it still makes them so much cooler. Because instead of being like, oh, you gotta toss a bomb into this fan and launch it over there and then explode it at the right time, or use fucking Cryonis, it's like, oh, here's this little like piece of technology, and here's a little thing that you can do with it. Go get to the end. Yeah, and like also in general, the shrines are just like a lot cooler in general. Admittedly, it is a bit unfortunate that they don't really have any like aesthetic differences. Like they're different from Breath of the Wild's, but they don't have aesthetic differences from each other. So it's like 150 something shrines that all like look the same, which is like a bit unfortunate. I do wish that like each region or something had like a slightly different aesthetic to their shrines, but also like again, the shrines are still a lot better. Like the Test of Strength, I forget what they're called in this game, but they're way cooler. Instead of like, oh great, I'm fighting this one singular mini guardian, it's like it does what they did with Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild, and it takes away all your gear and weapons, and so it's like it adds like an actual degree of challenge, and it's like, oh dang, I like gotta like figure out what I'm doing here. And so that stuff's way cooler. It also like feels much more like a shrine challenge, and like there's puzzles to it, and you're using mechanics and stuff instead of fight this one singular guy like 20 different times. So that's great. And speaking of fighting, combat is like noticeably better in this game. I do think it still has room for improvement, but it is definitely a lot better than Breath of the Wild. Like again, as mentioned, the runes, especially the fuse mechanic, help to make that a lot better, but there's also just like a bunch more enemies in this game, which I know I talk about later, so I'll say it with me now. We'll get back to that. But that all makes combat a lot more interesting, and there's also these like neat like raid style battles where there's just like a bunch of enemies in an area, and there's like one big shared like health bar that's at like the top of the screen, and so it's like, oh, I gotta like get through all of these guys and stuff, which is like kind of sort of a thing that was in Breath of the Wild, but it's just presented in a better and more interesting way here. I do wish that like there was kind of the elemental enemy types from Age of Calamity. I kind of wish that was here. Like, I know that's a spin-off, but like I feel like that would have added a lot more depth. And I also wish that there was just like more weapon types. Because in this game, it's still just the one-handed weapon, two-handed weapon, and spear. That's nice and all, and the fuse definitely, like, adds a lot to that. But it's like, okay, that's it though. Still, like, obviously, I'm kind of a game designer, but I'm not like a big time game designer at all, and I definitely don't know how to make a game like this. So I'm not like I don't have any specific ideas for what other like weapon types, but like just like having a couple other variety, because I guess there's also kind of like a few handful of like specialty things like the boomerang, but like again that still like technically functions as a sword, I think, unless you throw it. So that's one thing. And then again, getting back to just being better than Breath of the Wild in every way, the story's so much better. I'll get into story stuff later for like spoilers. There's gonna be like a spoiler section. But it's just so much better. Better in every way. I personally really didn't like Breath of the Wild's story, which is a bummer, because I think Breath of the Wild was really cool in a lot of ways, but not the story. They really like didn't want you to do the story, which is something that at least felt different in this game. This game, it felt much more like they actually wanted you to do the story, if that makes sense. Like, it felt less optional, even though it still technically is, on top of there being additional story sequences beyond just the 4 regions that they did in Breath of the Wild. Like, they do that too, but then there's also other story stuff, so that was also nice. This game still very much focuses on flashback/memories type of story structure that Breath of the Wild did, but it's handled so much better. Like, in this game, the memories and stuff weave a cohesive storyline and like a narrative, instead of in Breath of the Wild where it's pretty much just like little slices of life and then the apocalypse happens, which like I think could have worked, but I think they needed to do things differently for it to work better. I definitely like these memories a lot better. They're way better. Again, we'll get into characters and stuff like that later. Wild concept. But I do have one issue, which is that I wish they kind of forced you to do them in order. Like, I think something like going to each memory spot, it just unlocks the next one in the progression, instead of like it being that specific one in this region has that memory, this one has that other one. Because it's like, because it's such a more like actual like through line narrative, because it's like I got the first one, which they kind of point you towards the first one, and then the second one I got was right after a major character death. And so it's like, oh okay. Great. And it's like there is something in game that does kind of direct you to what the correct order to do them is, which is nice, but it's still like, I kind of wish we didn't have the option to do them completely and totally out of order. Yeah, so that's one thing, I guess, but it's still, again, cannot emphasize enough, so much better than how they did it in Breath of the Wild. At least in my opinion. I also just think the characters have more stuff going on, both in the flashbacks, as mentioned in Breath of the Wild, it's much more like just like a slice of life, whereas in Tears of the Kingdom, there's like things and stuff happening. But then even in the present day, even though it's still relatively minimal, there is actual like story sequences that occur in present day and have like cutscenes that occur in present day, which is very cool. It's very nice. It's very nice to have. It's definitely better. I never really had an issue with the voice acting in Breath of the Wild, even though I know a lot of people did, but I liked the voice acting in this one. I liked Matthew Mercer as Ganondorf a lot more than I thought I was gonna. That's nice, and Chris Hackney also did like a really good job as Rauru. That was cool. And also, one thing, the music. The music is really good in this game. As someone who's like a staunch Breath of the Wild music defender, I really liked like the minimal styling, and then even like quite a few of the songs that weren't minimal I liked a lot, like especially like the Guardian boss theme, the Hinox boss theme, others, etc. This game had a lot of really good music. The Colgera boss theme, of course, if you've been on TikTok recently, you've probably heard the Colgera boss theme, which is crazy. The main theme is great. Ancient Murals, which is the song that plays at the beginning of the game right before you encounter Ganondorf in like the prologue. Flux Construct battle theme's real good, and then a song that plays right around the end of the game, the pre-final boss encounter thing that I'm not gonna say the name of because the name of is like also a spoiler, I guess. So that's a lot of the areas where Tears of the Kingdom's like just better than Breath of the Wild, and so now we're gonna get into some of the things where it's kind of like different Not necessarily, like, it's better, but it's not areas where, like, Breath of the Wild was doing something in that Tears of the Kingdom is now just doing it better. So first of all, the depths. I've mentioned it earlier. It adds so much to the exploration. Like, it's wild. It's just, like, it's a really good change of pace, and it's got a good challenge to it, because when you go down to the depths, all of the enemies are infested with gloom, and there's like puddles of gloom and all that, puddles and like pools of gloom and everything. And gloom is like this like new thing. It's like kind of sort of Malice from Breath of the Wild, but like not quite for some reason. But it's something where when you get affected by it, you lose the heart permanently until you interact with a light route, which is essentially fast travel point in the depths, go to the overworld, or eat a sun-based food, which is like a super cool like challenge addition, especially because like the enemies in the depth do gloom damage, so it definitely makes it a lot harder. And there's a whole like optional story sequence in the depths with Master Koga and like the Yiga, which is kind of fun, and it plays into a really good dynamic with the other layers, which I'll get into once I've talked about the Sky Islands a little bit, which actually I'm getting into now, because I actually don't have much to say about the Sky Islands. Like, they were kind of disappointing, and I kind of thought they were going to be disappointing pre-launch, which was part of why I was so worried about Tears of the Kingdom, because they were only ever talking about the frickin' Sky Islands, and then it's like, oh, okay, there's also the depths, but like, you know, we're not going to tell you about that, because why would we? But yeah, they were kind of disappointing, aside from the initial tutorial, Great Sky Island, and the encounter in the Thunderhead Isle, which I'll talk about later. That's a spoiler stuff. Otherwise, most of the islands are like tiny little things that have like, oh, they have a shrine, or like they have a chest, and they're just kind of like not super interesting. They definitely add a layer of the mantra of like, oh, you see something, you want to go there in Breath of the Wild. It definitely adds to that, because it's like, not only do I have to figure out how to get to there, I also have to figure out how to get up there. So like, that's kind of cool, but like, it was just kind of like, whatever a lot of the time. But it does add to this really cool dynamic of the 3 different main layers of the game, where it's like, the overworld is where you're doing like your main exploring. It's where you're starting, at least, all of like the main story segments. And then the sky, it gives you chests that give you things that boost your sages, which is essentially the champions in this game. It also gives you sun-based items to cook with, which help you to explore the depths further, because then you can cure some of your gloomed hearts. And then the depths, it gives you good rewards. It gives you Zonite, which you can use to bump up your battery to use for Master Hand constructions. And then it also gives you like all of the DLC gear from Breath of the Wild, which is really cool. And also a lot of those are like pretty good. Or at least most of them. I think a couple might be in side quests, but like a lot of them are just like in the depths, which is very cool. And it's a very neat dynamic, but it is very much something where it's like, I wish we got like 1 or 2 more Sky Islands that were bigger, like the Great Sky Island. So yeah, that's my thoughts on those. But then there's also the caves on the overworld, which is, I think it's like 55, something like that, caves all over the overworld, which are just like little things. They don't have like a ton happening, at least usually. Some of them have a couple of like enemies, and like they're almost like mini shrines. But like, they're like nice. They're nice little distractions, and they definitely like help to encourage you in exploring the overworld, because again, it is a reused overworld from Breath of the Wild. The caves do a lot to encourage you to continue exploring, and that's kind of a big thing with this game in general, is that there's a lot here that encourages you to continue exploring this world you've likely been to before. There's a lot of like exploration that's incited just by like being like, oh, I want to go see what's happening in like Lurelin Village or whatever. Like what's happening there? What's going on with them? What's changed? And so I think the caves definitely help a lot with that type of exploration. One of the biggest negatives I have for this game, honestly, is just that the dungeons still aren't great. They're better than Breath of the Wild, if not just because they're like very thematically different from each other, finally. But like, they're not great. The Wind Temple's really cool. That stuff's awesome. But then like the rest of them are like whatever. And the Water Temple, I hated the Water Temple. I think the Water Temple was extremely lame. I think its whole story sequence was like whatever. And I think the temple itself was cartoonishly quick and easy to get through. Really didn't like the water temple. Super unfortunate. And also the 5th temple is technically the 6th temple, I guess, because you do return to the Hyrule Castle, and in this game they actually kind of make you explore through it this time, unlike in Breath of the Wild where you can just kind of climb to Ganondorf, so that's something. But yeah, the dungeons are still kind of just like not great and definitely not up to par for Zelda games, which is unfortunate. It definitely feels like the structure of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild has hindered these. And I definitely think something like limiting your abilities and options in dungeons would honestly go a long way to help make them better, or allow them to make better dungeons, which I don't know how people would feel about that in general. I know I would definitely appreciate it in the context of how not great these dungeons were. So that's unfortunate. But the game does run quite well on the Switch, at least in my experiences. It ran pretty well. Like, aside from diving from like the Sky Islands into the depths, there was like a little like hitch where it's like, oh, Link is frozen in the sky while the depths start loading real quick. Aside from that, I at least personally didn't encounter any notable issues, and again, as mentioned earlier, the stuff with rewind is kind of nuts. There is only one manual save in Tears of the Kingdom for some reason, and I don't know why. It's a very weird step back from Breath of the Wild. Yeah, I don't know what was up with that. So, yeah. They do let you customize your glider, though. You can really tell that these bullet points are kind of all over the place. I tried to organize them in a cohesive way, but some of them, I was just like, I have no clue where to put this. Throw it here. So we're talking about gliders now. I love that. I think it's awesome. I think it's a great way to implement some additional customization, and this is also what the amiibos get you. Like, you can get chests and stuff like Breath of the Wild that can get you the amiibo weapons and stuff like earlier than exploring the depths or doing side quests and stuff. However, they're not the only way to get those, which is great. But the amiibo gliders, this is the only way to get them, which is like kind of unfortunate because a lot of them are like really cool. But yeah, that's just like a really nice little addition, especially with the Sky Islands. You're going to be doing a lot more traversal in the air with your glider. So I think it was a very good call on their part. So I do think it did a very good job, or at least a better job, of blending Breath of the Wild's kind of throw out everything and do this new thing style with more traditional Zelda aspects. Like, the dungeons, as mentioned, were kind of disappointing, but they were still definitely closer to traditional dungeons than Breath of the Wild's were. All of the bosses, with one exception, were all like inspired by classical Zelda enemies and boss tropes, which was like super cool. It was very fun to like kind of like process that. There is one that I'm kind of confused by. It is in the fire dungeon, and it is technically a Goma, but it doesn't really look like a spider at all, or even like any sort of arachnid, so I don't know why it's a Goma, and I don't know why it's not Scaldera from Skyward Sword, because like, look at these two. Why aren't they the same dude? That one's just kind of weird, but it is a Goma, so that is still a classic Zelda deal, so that's very cool. And then even just like some of like the regular enemies, or at least not like dungeon boss enemies, are returning classics. We had Gibdos. We had these guys, which I've been calling Floor Masters because they're Floor Masters, but for some reason people on the internet call them Gloom Hands, and I don't know where they got that information from, because you can't take a picture of them to have them in your compendium. So I don't know where the internet decided these are Gloom Hands instead of just Floor Masters, which they obviously like are. So like, genuinely, correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments where we got this information from. And then we also have Likes, and we also have Gleeok. Gleeok is an overworld boss, a new overworld boss, that is inspired from the first boss in the first Zelda game. Which is really cool, because who the fuck thought that Gleeok was gonna ever come back? And I guess who thought that Lynels were gonna come back? That's all very cool. And then also there's just like a lot more like classical Zelda story and like lore structure and like elements. Like the imprisoning war is mentioned and kind of happens. Ganondorf is obviously there. Fi from Skyward Sword is like very explicitly like a thing here. There's definitely others, but I couldn't think of any when I was making bullet points, so we're just gonna rock out with that. Speaking of story and lore stuff, we're not getting into spoilers yet. However, it does a lot that kind of doesn't make any sense at all in the current timeline. Which, like, I know Nintendo very clearly doesn't give a single shit about the Zelda timeline. They clearly threw it together because people kept asking, and they're like, guys, shut up. Just, like, especially, like, looking at, like, the history of it, like, they've changed it so frequently for, like, no reason. But it's just one of those things where it's like, Tears of the Kingdom, like, doesn't make sense at all in the current timeline. So it's, like, one of two things. It's either, like, this is actually a new branching path, but this time it's coming off of Skyward Sword instead of Ocarina of Time like all of the other branches are. And so that timeline just has Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in it. Or it's that, like, the timeline is on such a immense scale and it's on, like, a cyclical, like, world where, like, events kind of just end up repeating and happening again later or earlier. And so it's just that this is actually the ending of a different timeline cycle instead of the one that we've experienced all the other games. You know, it's like poetry, it rhymes. But yeah, so that's one of those things where it's like, it's not like a bad thing, and honestly, if Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom kind of made its own, like, new timeline, I wouldn't be entirely against that. It's also like, Skyward Sword is the only one that actually, like, makes sense at all, and even then it's questionable. It's just one of those things that's like, I noticed it and it kind of irked me. Like, I was thinking about it through a lot of the story stuff. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Speaking of story stuff, every town gets a little, like, story thing happening. Except for Kakariko Village. Kakariko kind of doesn't really get anything. Like, yeah, it like, kind of sorta does. But it's mostly spent outside of Kakariko. So it's like, I don't know if I would really count that. But, like, all of the other towns and cities get some sort of story sequence. Obviously, there's the main 4 cities from Breath of the Wild. They obviously have the main 4 dungeons from this game. But then even Hateno has a fun little, like, election storyline of how do we keep tradition going in this town while also incorporating, like, new stuff and people, which is very neat. And then also Lurelin Village is invaded by pirates and is completely destroyed, so that's something. And there's also this whole new town right in central Hyrule, right, like, outside of the gates of the former castle town village / base camp being set up called Lookout Landing. I really appreciated it just because, like, it felt kind of odd that, like, there's just this, like, huge swath of land that there's not any city or, like, civilization. Like, it kind of makes sense in Breath of the Wild because the most guardians are in Hyrule Field and everything. But it's also, like, this feels weird from, like, a gameplay standpoint. But it's very cool, and it's also, like, throughout the story, the, like, people from each, like, region start to show up there as you, like, progress through their story. So, like, the town kind of evolves and builds, which is just, like, really cool and fun to watch. I really like Lookout Landing. I think it's a fun little, like, base camp. Also, every stable has a little story thing that happens, which is, like, it's neat. I like it. I like that it's a thing, but it's also like some of them, it gets a bit repetitive by the end because there's a bunch of stables, but also it's like some of them are a bit ridiculous. Like, you're like, really? You think Zelda told you to hang out with no clothes on and try and fend off monsters? Really? You think that's actually Zelda telling you to do that? Okay, guys. Speaking of stables, I liked how your horses from Breath of the Wild just, like, transfer over to Tears of the Kingdom. That's, like, a really, like, fun thing, but it also felt kind of weird, because that's the only thing you get for having Breath of the Wild. Especially a game like this that is so, like, built on being, like, a sequel. Like, it's so built on being, like, a companion piece to Breath of the Wild. And it's just like, oh, okay. Like, I'm happy to have my horses, I guess. I never really got too attached to mine just because I never rode them around, because I didn't have the ancient armor, because I played this game before the DLC, so, like, a lot of the times I had to ditch my horse and then I couldn't get him back. Whatever. I really liked how you could build a house in this game. That's such, like, a fun little thing. I liked how you could, like, actually, like, build a house here, but it still felt pretty limited, because it's, like, structured in, like, these, like, specific blocks for different rooms and stuff. Which, it definitely gives you a lot of options, but A, you can only use 12 blocks, B, the room setting, or the room options, there isn't, like, a ton, and also, like, you can't really, aside from the weapons, the varying weapon stands, and the photo frame, kinda, like, can't really do much to decorate or, like, change up the individual room stylings. Like, I wish there was like more options to like this specific room type, but like you can like add or change or alter different things, whether it's like specific things that the game lets you or even just like kind of lets you go wild, like whatever. But overall, it was still like a cute thing, and I personally liked it better than how Breath of the Wild did Link getting a house. And speaking of Link's house, Link and Zelda like live together, which is really cute. I really like that. I think it's really cute. Like, it's very clear that like they're just like in a relationship together in this game. I wish we got to see more of it, because unfortunately Zelda is not present with Link. We'll get into that in the spoilery section. But yeah, I think it's really cute that they live together. They live in Hateno Village. Zelda's like a teacher for like little kids, which is super cute. And it's also like you can like really see that like they've gotten to like know each other and like be close, because it's like there's a bit right at the beginning. They're like investigating these ruins, and Zelda wants to take a picture, and she's like super excited, and she's immediately trying to like pull out her Purah pad, which is the Sheikah pad replacement, and like instinctively Link just goes and grabs the torch out of her hand for her, so she has both hands, and it's just like a very like little detail, but it's like really cute. But yeah, speaking of that, just talking about some character stuff. I'm not gonna get into any like super specifics here, because A, I don't remember much, frankly, and also that would be like spoilers, but can't talk about characters and not mention Purah. Why'd they make her so hot? Why is she so hot in this game? Why'd they do that? I'm not complaining. I'm just confused. But she also just gets to be like an actual main character, finally, which is really nice. It's nice to have just like more main characters compared to Breath of the Wild. There's one little thing that I wish they did with her at the very end of the game, but I will get into that when we get to the spoiler section. Riju, she's great in this game. I love her in this game. Shout out to women. I love women. Yeah, she's great. She just gets to be like cool. She's just the cool leader of the Gerudo now. She's obviously not like huge and shredded like Urbosa, but she is she's taller than Link now, which with Purah becoming like an adult again, I think Link's like the second shortest character, at least like human character in this game now. Tulin, who's like this minor secondary character for Breath of the Wild that I genuinely didn't remember existed, gets to like do like main story stuff. And then Zelda is great. She gets a whole very interesting arc, and like she just like it very clearly like, she like has like stuff and like thoughts happening. God, girl needs a fucking break though. And then also like frankly all of the main characters from the memory sequence I really like personally, at least. And even Yunobo, the Goron guy from present day Breath of the Wild, even he's not completely forgettable. He becomes a capitalist and a bitch and sells crack rock, which I don't think that's necessarily an improvement to his character, but I like it more. It made me actually remember him. But then on the other hand, there's quite a few characters that kind of get shafted, particularly Impa and Teba. They like don't have any like speaking lines. Like they have like text boxes, but they don't have any like spoken lines in the story, and they're kind of completely written out. And especially with Teba, it feels out of place, because the other three like new champions from Breath of the Wild are the other three sages, but Tulin's the Rito champion instead of Teba. So like I don't know what happened there. I don't know if like one of the voice actors for Teba couldn't come back, so they're like, well, we need someone who can do the voice for the sage. I don't know what happened there. And Impa, I got nothing. I have no clue why she was completely written out of this game. And Paya. Impa and Paya. I actually did mean Paya when I was writing this. I totally forgot they were different people, I'll be honest, because I forgot Impa was in this game. Yeah, like Impa frankly gets more than Paya did, but I still forgot she was in the game. I forgot she wasn't Paya, which, woof. Then there's also like a new character, Taro. He's neat. I like his design, but like he doesn't really get to do much. He gets a little bit at like towards the end of the game, but like it's still like not much. And I also just didn't really care for what was happening with Sidon. Not even in like a weird like I want Link and Sidon to kiss, because they are boyfriends. They are boyfriends still. Look at that. They have a statue of Link riding him. What? They moved Sidon's dead sister to have a statue of them intimately close. I don't care if Sidon's marrying another woman. They can work it out. But it's just that like I just didn't really care about what was happening with Sidon, which is unfortunate because I love Sidon. Yeah, and then speaking of those sages, I really liked their inclusion. I really liked that even though they're kind of like ghostly projections instead of the actual characters, that they like walk around with you in the overworld, and they even like fight with you. Like, that's super cool, and it really like gives like these RPG party vibes, which honestly it just makes me want RPG Zelda game made by like Monolith Soft or something, or like Square Enix. That'd be so cool. I would go actually nuts for that. But it was very nice, but it's also like, some of them just aren't nearly as helpful as others. Like, Tulin's the only one that you actually kind of need, because it helps you with traversal. Whereas the other three are there. You know, was kind of useful in specific situations, but the other two, you can just do their abilities by fusing certain items. So it's like, okay. But also with the sages, why are their abilities not button mapped? Like, you have to walk up to them and interact with them with the A button that you use for so many other things in this game to do their thing. Which is, frankly, I hate to say it, that's like awful game design. Why'd they do that? But anyway, let's get into some spoilery stuff. I don't have too much to say, but I do have some spoiler things that I just want to mention. I just want to be like, ooh, check this out. But so if you don't want spoilers for later game stuff, skip to the time that's on the screen. This is pretty much the ending. I have like a little like closing statement. We're pretty much at the end. Which also, wow, I had so much more to say about this game than I thought I was going to. So that's interesting. But that also just says a lot about how much there is in this game, and how much there is to talk about, that even like 2.5 months later, with a lot of my thoughts faded, I've still managed to talk for probably around like 50-something minutes, nearly an hour. That's kind of crazy. But yeah, so now into spoilery stuff. I just want to mention the first encounter with Phantom Ganon. That's wild. Like, he's just kind of scary to look at because he's like all mummified and shit. But it's also like, I never fought the Floor Masters. I encountered them once prior to the Great Deku Tree stuff. And then it's like, oh, the Great Deku Tree's sick. And he's like, oh, jump down into my hole. And then there's the Floor Masters, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll fight him this time. And then I beat them. And little do I know, Phantom Ganon just shows up after you beat the Floor Masters. Like, what? I was so not prepared for that. That shit was wild. Later on I learned, just anytime you beat the Floor Masters, Phantom Ganon shows up. Speaking of Phantom Ganon, the story sequence in the castle, I really liked that. I really liked that a lot. Again, as mentioned earlier, it actually makes you explore around the castle instead of just skipping straight to the tippy top. You do like a fight against like 5 or 6 Phantom Ganons, which is again really cool. And they also kind of bring back the idea of Puppet Zelda from Twilight Princess. Again, very cool. And then also just like the story stuff that happens there, because you get to see all of the sages be with you in a room together, and they interact with each other, which is something that I didn't know I so desperately wanted. Because Breath of the Wild, you don't like get that at all. And there's also like there's a couple of other little story sequences, as well as the end of the game, where you actually get more of that type of stuff. Speaking of sages, final sage, the 5th sage, Minoru, just fun. It's kind of dumb, but like, it's very fun to just get to pilot a little mech around, and especially after, as mentioned previously, seeing people literally build like Gundams out of the Master Hand stuff. That's just fun, that's cute. The final sequence of the game is awesome. That shit's really cool. And especially the final dive, where Link is reaching out to Zelda to grab her, just like at the beginning of the game. It's like poetry, it rhymes. And then like the final boss and the war in the depths of Hyrule Castle, which is the song that I mentioned way at the beginning of the video that I didn't want to mention because the name's a spoiler. But that song, awesome. That encounter is so cool. Like I was playing with my friends and they were just like, you should go down there. And I was like, I don't know, because at this point I had went into the depths of Hyrule Castle, but I just like didn't find the path to actually get to the end of the game. So I was like, oh, is it like not actually down here? Where do I go? And I was talking to my friend about it, and then he was like, but like, what if you just like actually like went as far down as you physically could? And I tried to go, and I was like, oh, there's like actually more. And then I got to the war in the depths of Hyrule Castle, and I was just like, oh fuck. So that was cool. The Ganondorf fight I thought was really cool, but it's also like I'm not good at this game, so I felt it was pretty reasonably difficult. Seeing Ganondorf bullet time dodge and then parry Link was... I kind of lost my mind there. I was just like, oh fuck. And then also for his second phase, I'll put it on the screen, his health bar, because it's like, you see the name, and you see the health bar filling up like how they do with all the boss fights, and usually it stops at the end of the name card. But it just kept on going to the end of the screen, which is like, on one hand, really cool, but on the other hand, so fucking funny. And then, one last spoiler thing about Purah that I mentioned earlier. I wish she became the new Spirit Sage at the end of the game, because all of the other 4 sages are passed on to the new champions in Tulin. But then the Spirit Sage, which is Minoru, she also passes on and is gone now, but she doesn't pass on the Spirit Sage or the Spirit Stone to Purah, which is like, okay. But why though? She was so interested in like the Zonai tech, she would have been perfect to fill that role. Overall, Tears of the Kingdom represents a massive improvement on Breath of the Wild. Just about everything is better here, with a few areas still open to improvement. From what I've seen, it plays very well as a companion piece to Breath of the Wild. A lot of the easiest areas in that game are very difficult in this one, like the Great Plateau, and vice versa. There's even like a bunch of Korok puzzles that are inspired on undoing the like boulder pushing Korok puzzles from Breath of the Wild, which is very cute. And as mentioned earlier, much of the exploration is incited by, ooh, what's happened in such and such place? Let me go find out. I think this makes it difficult to recommend skipping Breath of the Wild straight up. But also, I had a 6-year gap between playing these games, so I don't know what the experience of playing Breath of the Wild and then like immediately going into Tears of the Kingdom is. It's definitely something where I'd say I'm never going back to play Breath of the Wild with this game. It really makes it feel, in some areas at least, like just a really big tech demo. But for as much good as it has, it does feel like an incremental improvement. I would still easily say, if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, you will enjoy this game. And I would say it is still an excellent game and a must-buy for Switch owners. Anyway, yeah, so just ending off real quick on this video that ended up being so much longer than I thought it was gonna be. I'm so sorry. I'm probably gonna try and cut down a lot of this, but as of recording, it's like an hour long. So, I hope you enjoyed that. I would also like to shout out my boyfriend, who I played kind of in tandem with. Like, we had our own games, but we played it kind of side by side a lot of the time. For, those like 90-something hours that we were playing that game. And then also, I talked to him a lot right after we finished it, because we finished it the same day, and helped a lot to solidify my thoughts and ideas on this game. And then also I texted him while I was writing the notes for this, and he also was very helpful with that, so shout out to him. And I hope you're excited for the next episode with Citizen Sleeper, which will be so much shorter. But until then, bye-bye.